Honourable member for Niagara West Glanbrook.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I would certainly like to thank the member from Parry Sound, Muskoka, for whom his insightful comments and importance on Bill C-21 earlier. I would also like to extend my gratitude to this House for allowing me to rise today and speak to why I think it's important to support Bill C-21, the Red Tape Reduction Act. As you know, Bill C-21 is an important piece of legislation when it comes to how the government relates and engages with one of the drivers of Canada's economy, small business. As one of the members of the Red Tape Reduction Commission, I feel privileged to rise and speak on this issue today. One of the key drivers of the Commission was that helping business succeed in Canada requires doing all we can as a government to decrease the amount of administrative burden that regulations impose on businesses. Bill C-21 represents a strong step towards accomplishing this goal for many reasons. In my time today, I would like to focus on one of such reasons in terms of the importance of enshrining into law this government's one-for-one rule. This rule, which has been in effect since April 1st, 2012, has already proven to be effective in controlling and even reducing red tape regulations which hurt small business. It works by placing strict controls on the growth of regulatory red tape on businesses by applying a very simple principle. For every new regulation that's added that imposes an administrative burden on businesses, one must be removed. In addition, regulators must offset any increases in administrative burden as a result of regulatory changes with equal reductions from existing regulations. Canada is one of the first countries in the world to give the one-for-one rule the added muscle of legislation, making it the most aggressive red tape regulation in the world. What's more, Mr. Speaker, we know it works. The one-for-one rule has already proven successful. System-wide controls and regulatory red tape that impact businesses. Specifically, as of June 14, 2014, it had resulted in a net annual reduction of over $22 million in administrative burden imposed on businesses. An estimated annual savings of 290,000 hours in time spent dealing with regulatory red tape, and a net reduction of 19 federal regulations taken off the books. Mr. Speaker, by giving the one-for-one rule the added muscle of legislation, this government is clearly demonstrating just how committed it is to reducing unnecessarily regulations on businesses. We know that time spent navigating red tape is valuable time that a small business owner could otherwise use to grow their operations and create jobs. Mr. Speaker, when I speak about red tape, I am referring to the unnecessary and undue compliance burden placed on small businesses. Compliance burden is exactly the time and resources spent by businesses to demonstrate compliance with federal government regulations and can include the following: planning, collecting, processing, and reporting of information, completing forms and retaining data required by governments, inspection costs, and time wasted waiting for regulatory decisions and feedback. There are many areas of Canada's economy which benefit from discrete regulation, like safe food, airspace control, workplace health and safety, etc. However, every regulation that requires paperwork or equipment or training imposes compliance costs on a business. At some point, regulations get into diminishing return territory when the cost, the time, and the effort required to comply with the regulations outweighs the benefits conferred by the regulation. Our government recognizes this red tape problem, and through measures like the one-for-one rule, we are taking measures to curb it. A couple of years ago, when I participated in the Red Tape Reduction Commission, which consulted a wide cross-section of Canadians for ideas of reducing onerous administrative overhead on Canadian businesses, what I heard was the feedback of hardworking small business owners who were absolutely fed up with overregulation, tedious paperwork, and valuable time wasted. This past week, I stood proudly by our Prime Minister, fellow members of Parliament, and Executive Vice President of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, CFIB, Laura Jones in the Niagara region, through talking to and hearing the stories of small businesses within my riding, as well as Canadian small business representatives like Ms. Jones of the CFIB, one thing becomes immediately clear. Red tape heavily limits the ability of small businesses to grow. And I just may add that CFIB had Red Tape Awareness Week just last week from January 19th to the 23rd. So this is actually very good timing as we introduce this legislation. I also mentioned that I had a chance to work with Ms. Jones with the Red Tape Reduction Roundtable, and it was a great experience. To put it into words of our Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, red tape and administrative burdens all represent a silent killer of jobs in this country. Although Canada has been recognized by the OECD as having a sophisticated and mature regulatory system that continues to maintain high levels of health, safety, security, and environmental protection, the OECD has also recommended that reducing undue regulatory costs would help to improve Canada's economic performance. But let me be clear, Mr. Speaker, applying the one-for-one rule and giving it legislative shape it requires to fulfill its mandate does not in any way compromise the presence of important health and safety regulations. Put simply, we are not repealing, I repeat, we are not repealing health and safety standards. We are making it less of an administrative nuisance to comply with them. Canadians can count on this government and its regulatory system to uphold the public trust and to continually enforce the health and safety standards which protect everyday Canadians. One of the aspects of the red tape reduction plan I am most proud of is of its level of public consultation and transparency which informed its approach. As a government, we listened to the advice provided by small business owners from across the country, and we reflected very carefully on that advice. In doing so, we understand the necessity of enforcing regulations which maintain Canada's high standards for safety and protection. We believe that regulations can and should coexist with freeing businesses from unnecessary, costly, and time-consuming red tape. Mr. Speaker, I would like to remind my honourable colleagues that reducing regulatory red tape was one of the commitments we made to Canadians in October 2012 when we first announced the Red Tape Reduction Action Plan. This plan is one of the most aggressive in the world today at reducing red tape, and with its implementation, Canada is bringing a new level of discipline to how we regulate and create a more predictable environment for businesses. Mr. Speaker, I would like to update you, if I may, on the progress we have made in this important effort. In all, the Red Tape Reduction Plan introduced 6 system-wide reforms to the federal regulatory system to limit regulatory creep and to free up small businesses to focus on what they do best, which is to grow and create jobs. This plan has helped businesses meet challenges in the areas of payroll, labor, and trade. It has further introduced time-saving measures like single windows and electronic submissions. Mr. Speaker, we have made substantial progress in implementing the reforms outlined in the plan. As well as the one-for-one rule, a number of other reforms are advancing well. For example, federal regulators have stepped up efforts to ensure new and existing service standards are publicly posted, making the approval process for complying with regulations more transparent for business. In addition, departments have posted 40 forward regulatory plans on their websites, providing early notice of upcoming regulations so that stakeholders can provide input and prepare for their implementation. All of these initiatives are proving their value, and they're further demonstrating this government's commitment to a transparent and safe system for business growth, which is not weighed down by unnecessary red tape. We have also saved small businesses in Canada $75 million annually through the application of the small business lens. In the fall of 2014, the government published the Administrative Burden Baseline, a key commitment of the action plan that clearly tracks the total number of requirements that impose administrative burden on businesses. Finally, we have also put into place a Regulatory Advisory Committee. This committee's main task is to provide the President of the Treasury Board with advice on the fairness and reliability of the government's annual scorecard report. We recently published our second scorecard report during Red Tape Awareness Week. It shows that we continue to eliminate unnecessary rules and costs that have been a source of frustration for Canadian businesses and entrepreneurs across the country, while maintaining high standards for the protection of the health and safety of our citizens. The bottom line is that this report confirms that we have made tangible progress in cutting red tape for Canadians and businesses. Let me now turn to a few examples of how departments are putting the Red Tape Action Plan into action. There are numerous examples. I'm thinking of one, the launch of the buyandsell.gc.ca at Public Works and the Government Services Canada, and the modernization of food safety regulations through the Canadian Food Inspection Agency's Safe Food for Canadians Act. There's also the launch by Canada Revenue Agency of the new online and mail service for Canadian small businesses. The service allows businesses to communicate with CRA online, helping streamline their interactions with the agency. CRA also launched My Business Account, the online inquiry service where business people or their representatives could ask the agency tax-related questions about their accounts online and receive answers online. I know one of the things that we heard over and over again was the frustration of businesses to call and not be able to get anything actually in writing. And it made it difficult for them when they called someone or bounced around and went to different people. So this here is a very direct response to what we heard in talking to small business people. As well, CRA introduced a one-stop web page for businesses, allowing them to easily find information and service options relevant to their tax situation. In addition, Stats Canada has improved communication with survey respondents to better explain the purpose of business surveys. The changes include redesigning printed material and improving a section of their website. Mr. Speaker, these are just a few of the many departmental actions that are underway to reduce red tape. The one-for-one rule and other red tape reforms demonstrate our resolve to improve Canada's regulatory system and help businesses focus their energies on seizing new opportunities. They're part of the broader commitment to ensuring Canada's playing at its A game when it comes to creating the right environment in which businesses can grow and create jobs. Mr. Speaker, Bill C-21 is smart legislation that helps Canadian businesses become more productive and succeed in an increasingly competitive global marketplace. The Red Tape Reduction Act requires that regulators take seriously the requirement to control the amount of red tape imposed on businesses and the related costs. This legislation is also designed to be tough. It challenges regulators to think through how regulations can be designed and implemented in ways that don't impose unnecessary red tape on businesses. But while it's tough, it nonetheless offers a great deal of flexibility. The government's commitment to maintaining Canada's high standards for health and safety is unwavering and will not come at the cost of helping small businesses succeed. This legislation is also timely. As you know, one of the government's top priorities is creating a climate in which businesses can innovate, invest in the future, and create economic growth and jobs. That is why, despite what's happening in the global economy today, Canada has and continues to post one of the strongest job creation records in the G7, with over 1.2 million jobs created since July 2009. I would add that over 85% of those jobs created since July 2009 are full-time positions, and almost two-thirds are in high-wage industries. Looking ahead, this government believes Canada is positioned for sustained economic growth. We are one of the few countries that can boast of having both declining taxes and low debt. Mr. Speaker, our government remains committed to eliminating the deficit. This will ensure we continue to create a business climate here in Canada that invites investment, prosperity, and growth. Canadian businesses have to be playing at the top of their game to succeed and to compete in a global economy. This is especially true in uncertain times, such as those we faced since the 2008 global recession. By reducing debt, we can free up tax dollars that would otherwise be absorbed by interest costs. We can then reinvest that money in the things that matter to Canadians, such as health care, public services, or lower taxes. I would add that reducing debt also strengthens the country's ability to respond to economic shocks, such as global financial crisis. Mr. Speaker, it's worth remembering that when the hard times arrived in 2008, Canada was in a position of economic strength compared to our international partners. This allowed us to put in place one of the most comprehensive stimulus packages in the world. At the time, international observers, such as the International Monetary Fund, were predicting that Canada would have one of the fastest recoveries. And I'm proud to say that these predictions have come true, given our relative economic, financial, and fiscal strength. Mr. Speaker, our red tape initiatives all demonstrate the government's ongoing commitment to helping Canadian businesses succeed and are part of a broad strategy that is present in almost everything we do. Just look at the recent PricewaterhouseCoopers study analyzing the ease of paying taxes in 189 countries. The study, called Paying Taxes 2014, found that a business in Canada takes 25% less time, 25%, than a business in the United States to prepare, file, and pay its taxes each year. Furthermore, the study said that Canada is the only G7 country to rank amongst the top 10 countries based in the overall ease of complying with tax obligations. Clearly, balanced budgets and responsible fiscal management have been one of the keys to helping small businesses succeed, as well as success as a country. Through real action, such as enshrining the one-for-one rule in law, we are making the regulatory system more conducive to economic growth. We are creating a more predictable environment for businesses, particularly for small and medium-sized businesses. And we are freeing entrepreneurs from the burden of regulatory red tape. Our government is focused on the drivers of growth and job creation, innovation, investment, education, skills, and communities, underpinned by our ongoing commitment to keeping taxes low and returning to a balanced budget. This is our plan for Canada. Mr. Speaker, I hope the members of this House will join us in enshrining the one-for-one rule into law to help Canadian businesses to succeed. And just as I'm wrapping up here, I talked about how this all fits together. And I look at an acronym called TIRE that this government has used. And TIRE stands for T is for taxes and trade, I is for infrastructure, investments, and immigration, R is for R&D, red tape, production, relationships, and E is for entrepreneurship. So if I could just go through that, you see how it all ties together. It was talked about in the speech how we look at reducing red tape. That is just one thing, and a large array of things that this government has done to make Canada more competitive. If I start with the T in terms of taxes and trade, we looked at reducing taxes for business to make us more competitive on the world stage. And in addition to that, we've fostered additional trade deals, the European Free Trade Deal, all the numerous deals that this country is working on right now, because we realize as a net exporter, we need to sell our goods and services around the world. There's no way that 35 million people could sustain the kind of GDP that we've come to enjoy without the ability to trade. So that's the T for TIRE. I is infrastructure, investments, and immigration. We've continued to move forward on immigration reforms to make sure that we look at bringing the best and brightest people into this country. We've looked at continuous investments. You look at the Detroit Bridge that stalled under the previous Liberal government, and we've worked hard to make sure that we realize that what will happen is we can get our goods and services to the U.S. in a timely way, given the fact they represent one of our largest trading partner at over 75%. And if you look at infrastructure, there was massive infrastructure that we've spent, and we continue to commit to infrastructure over the next 10 years as we realize that is important for the sake of the country. R&D, I've talked about trying to make that more targeted, more specific, and more timely. I've just spent my whole speech talking about our red tape reduction, which is absolutely huge. And then the last letter is E, for entrepreneurship. We started a venture capital fund, or we set aside $400 million where we could try and attract, realizing that it's tough sometimes for companies to get started. One of the issues that continues to be there is access to capital. So we believe that we can continue to create the climate in this country. We believe that we will not only continue to lead the world in development, but will continue to lead the world in jobs, and Canada will be the best country in the world to live in, to work in, and to play in. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? Question et commentaire. The honourable member for Windsor West.
I'd like to say to the member, I appreciate his comments, but I would add a D to the end of his tire for a done government, and it is a tired argument. We really see in this legislation ideology of a one-to-one versus that of proper regulation when it comes to new products and entry into the market. And I'd ask the member, when a new product comes in, a new product that's different, it could be a new tablet, it could be a new device, it could be something different. Why would we apply the one-to-one when we actually have to build in regulations that are new?
For Niagara West, Glanbrook.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague for the question. And as I mentioned in the remarks of my speech, you know, one of the things that we will not jeopardize is the health and safety of Canadians. So that'll be something that we continue to look at. And I think it's only practical as we look at increased regulation or the threat of increased regulation and rules that we manage all these things. And we understand that if we want to bring one in, there may be other ones that we need to remove to make sure that we can continue to keep the burden of red tape down. And I think one of the things that concerns me is the fact that as a government, we've done a great job reducing red tape, but there's still more work to be done at the provincial and municipal level. And I think one of the biggest challenges we have is that we go ahead and reduce red tape, and it's good for businesses, but the provinces need to step up also to do these things, as well as the municipality. Because when I talk to small business people, they tell me one of the biggest challenges they have is complying with all the paperwork and all the forms and all the things that need to be done. So I'll just reiterate to the member again, we have no intention to jeopardize health and safety of Canadians. That is first, as paramount in what we do. But what we need to do is find ways to help our business people succeed by making sure that we remove some of the obstacles that make it difficult for them to do what they need to do, which is create jobs and create wealth for people in this economy.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Malpeque.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the member talks about reducing red tape. But with so much of what this government does, it's more deception than reality. And I'll use, for example, he talked about the infrastructure program. The government did announce the biggest infrastructure program in Canadian history. The problem, the money really doesn't flow till about 2019. And so that's not going to do a lot of good about Canadians. They've been talking about reducing red tape for years, but when I talk to small businesses, they are still complaining about the burdens they face in terms of paperwork. And I guess as a last point, he mentioned that they'll not undermine Canadians' health and safety, but we're seeing recently on the safety side, Mr. Speaker, that at least with the RCMP, when you look at the Marathon report and the Moncton report, those recommendations were not acted on, and the reason they weren't acted on is because the resources were not there in terms of personnel and finances to put in place the equipment and training and weaponry for the RCMP to do their job. So a lot of deception on that side, Mr. Speaker, and not much reality.
Honourable member for Niagara West, Glanbrook.
I want to thank my honourable colleague from Malpeque for the question. And I think that just if I could address some of the things he talks about, you know, one of the challenges I mentioned before is that as we look at trying to streamline the regulatory burden or the regulatory framework, this challenge still remains that we have provincial and municipal legislation and provincial and municipal red tape and regulations. And that continues to be a challenge. And I know that a number of years ago, the Progressive Conservative government in Ontario had a red tape reduction commission under Mr. Harris, where they looked at trying to reduce some of these things. And unfortunately, what's happened over time is those additional burdensome red tape has crept back in. And I think one of the things that we need to be mindful of, and I know that's what the one-for-one does, it's trying to create a new mindset. So when we look at how we could do this, as I talked about in my remarks, it's different agencies, it's different government bureaucracies posting online what they're thinking about doing, and then working with industry to find out a way on how they can actually do a good job with that. And I think that it's a mindset that we need to look at. I think that we could go around the country, we could consult, but unless we're prepared to sit down and make it a part of the way we look at how we do business, then I think we'll have a hard time making it stick. And I know that.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Ancaster, Dundas, Flamborough, Westdale.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I really appreciate my colleague from Niagara West Glanbrook, his speech. In fact, one of the things about this chamber that is regretful is oftentimes we don't hear about the actual resume, the curriculum vitae of our individual members, because sometimes they're very robust, and this particular member has one of those. And so rather than talk about the program at the level that he was speaking of in regards to government and municipalities and provinces, I'm just wondering if he'd share just personally what it's like because he's a very successful small businessman prior to being elected, what it's like for a small entrepreneur who has very narrow margins, who's trying to make sure he can find the right people to work for him, to be effective, deal with municipal, provincial, and federal regulation. How tough is it when there's an extra layer of burden upon him, and what does that mean to an entrepreneur who may or may not be able to balance his books at the end of the month, end of the quarter, end of the year?
Honourable member for Niagara West, Glanbrook.
And I want to thank my colleague from Ancaster, Dundas, Flamborough, Westdale. You know, one of the challenges I think that small business people have in this country is that they're expected to wear many hats. You know, when a small business person, a man or woman starts a business, they need to be part HR. They need to be part finance. They need to be part marketing. They need to be part, administrator and operator. And I think the challenge is that what we heard from people across the country, and I remember sitting around the table, it was the same thing if I was in Ontario, I was in BC, is that, you know, what we're required to provide sometimes is duplication, right? Sometimes it's like you're asking me the same thing 2 or 3 times, when if you just talked internally, you would actually have what you need. And I think that, you know, when you get into larger companies, there are finance people, there are accounting departments that will handle some of those things. You know, and I think of what happens when a company decides to go public, whether it's here in Canada. One of the biggest things that happens when a company goes public is their accounting department, it swells by 2, 3, 4, 5 times, because the amount of compliance that they are required to have when they're publicly traded is a requirement to be publicly traded. We get that. What we're talking about is trying to deal with a small business person that has to do multiple things. And maybe they have to pull a shift because someone called in sick. Or maybe they have to figure out how they're going to hire somebody and put ads in the paper, et cetera, et cetera. So we're looking at not trying to actually affect the safety and security of Canadians. What we're trying to do is remove some of the duplication. We're trying to make sure that we take, as I mentioned in my speech, a small business lens approach, which I think is absolutely key if we're going to look at it from a small business point of view. Yes, we still require these things, but how can we make it? How can we provide? How can we make it easier for the small business man or woman to provide all these things and still run their business successfully and create the jobs that we need as Canadians?
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable colleague from Niagara West Glanbrook, and I support anything that reduces the red tape burden on small business. My father, we ran a small business on Cape Breton Island, and my late father used to have a bulletin board with a big headline, "The Government of Canada Never Sleeps," and he would post the things he'd been required to fill out for the enjoyment of tourists. But I was actually going to follow up on the point that my friend made about debt, and it isn't part of this bill, but he made the point it was important to pay down debt. I'm concerned that we're not paying attention to the fact that Canada's national debt is now larger than it's ever been before. It's over $600 billion. The current Prime Minister presided over 24% of that debt building. It's going to be $29 billion this year in interest payments. And I'm wondering, I know that my honourable colleague isn't the Minister of Finance, but if he has any crystal ball as to whether or not his administration has any plans to pay down the debt or is just interested in trying to spend money.
Well, I think the question's actually, as the member referenced, it's a little bit outside of the parameters of the question that's before the House. However, I do recognize the honourable member for Niagara West Glanbrook did invoke some discussion around that line, so he may want to take that question. The honourable member for Niagara West Glanbrook.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my colleague from Sandwich Gulf Islands. And certainly would love to entertain that. I mean, that's a great question. The question's around debt, and I think that where I can't foresee where the budget's going to be in terms of paying down debt. What I can assure you is where we're going to move back to balanced budgets. And I think that's the first step that we need to look at. We can't even entertain paying down additional debt at this stage until we actually get a balanced budget. So that'll be the first thing we do. And it was mentioned in my speech, one of the things that creates as we balance the budget, as we reduce debt, is that we reduce interest. And when we reduce interest, that frees up money to provide more programming, that provides the opportunity potentially for tax cuts, that also provides the potential for additional infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think, to my honourable colleague's question, it is important that we continue to reduce and come back to balanced budgets so that we do have options and then we can move forward with a new budget that would give us those options with maybe some suggestions that come up in the new year. Thank you.